I remember your impatience during the January 6th committee's work with the Justice Department's apparent lack of interest in the ground you were covering. It's now very clear Jack Smith is on the case that you, in effect, sent to them, have presented to them. What should he be looking for, especially in relation to that meeting?
Well, I think what he's going to be looking for is what's the evidence of the president's intent, his knowledge, how far was he willing to go to overturn the election, which would be very important if he's considering a conspiracy charge to defraud the United States. Because what we saw was the former president began by trying to stop the counting of the absentee ballots. When that didn't work, he tried to stop states from certifying him as the loser and Joe Biden as the winner. When that didn't work, he tried to get state legislatures to go back into session and declare the loser the winner. And when that didn't work, they tried this fake elector plot. When that didn't work in this December meeting, they were entertaining having the military seize voting machines, declaring martial law. You just had these extreme, crazy, dangerous proposals being debated within the president's team. We divided them, or they divided themselves into Team Crazy and Team Not As Crazy. But it culminated, of course, in the violence of January 6th. And at the end of this December meeting, I think this is when the president tweets out to people, to be there on the 6th, that this will be wild. So not getting the answers he wanted in this meeting, he goes to the extreme of inciting this attack on the Capitol.
And as you and the committee developed the evidence, you found that the White House lawyers were not invited to this meeting. This was not scheduled and, hey, make sure you're here for this. They were finding out about it and rushing into this room where the madness was being discussed. Let's listen to more from the White House counsels, Pat Cipollone and Eric Hirschman, about that meeting.
I opened the door and I walked in. I saw General Flynn. I saw Sidney Powell sitting there. I was not happy to see the people who were in the Oval Office.
Explain why.
Well, again, I don't think they were providing. Well, first of all, the Overstock person, I've never knew who this guy was. Actually, the first thing I did, I walked in, I looked at him, and I said, "Who are you?" And he told me. I don't think any of these people were providing the president with good advice. And so I didn't understand how they had gotten in.
I was asking, like, you claiming the Democrats were working with Hugo Chavez, Venezuelans, and whomever else. And at one point, General Flynn took out a diagram that supposedly showed IP addresses all over the world, and who was communicating with whom via the machines, and some comment about like Nest thermostats being hooked up to the internet. I think that it got to the point where the screaming was completely out there. I mean, you get people walk in, it was late at night, it had been a long day, and what they were proposing, I thought was nuts.
Jack Smith has presumably heard from all of those witnesses.
Yes, and I think it's worth reminding people when they hear Cipollone or Hirschman saying how against this they were. These were people that enabled Donald Trump for a long time. Cipollone and Hirschman were either, in fact, in the first impeachment, enabling the Ukraine misconduct or defending it after the fact. So these are not people who were never Trumpers. These were people who were with him up until the very bitter end, and then got to the point, as Bill Barr did, where their view was, okay, even I can't go this far on behalf of this corrupt president. So their testimony is going to be very important. I hope that Jack Smith, and believe that Jack Smith, will be able to get them, in particular Cipollone, to answer questions he would not answer for the January 6th committee. He would walk up to conversations he had with Donald Trump, but wouldn't describe most of those conversations. We didn't have the time or the enforcement ability to compel him to do so. I hope that the special counsel.
Yeah, he would claim a kind of non-existent executive privilege over these conversations with you.
Oh yes, and what's more, we've seen judges like Judge Carter out in California who pierced the attorney-client privilege. We saw that again with a judge in Florida for different reasons. You can't use that privilege to hide criminal activity. And I would hope that the special counsel got the answers we didn't, because even if something in that meeting in December is not the subject of a charge per se, it could be very important for showing the president's knowledge that he lost the election, his willingness to defraud people, the extreme steps he would take. That could be very powerful evidence either as to a conspiracy charge or to a particular charge, like in Georgia, trying to defraud the voters in Georgia by further demonstrating in conversations with his own White House counsel that they told him there's no merit to these bogus allegations of fraud.
To be clear, your impatience with the Justice Department on this investigation was all before Jack Smith was appointed. Have you gone, as you watch the Jack Smith prosecution from this distance, from impatience to confidence in the investigation Jack Smith is conducting?
Yes, I think that he has moved with swiftness. I remain concerned, though, of how long it took to get to him, because we're now 2.5 years out. And if the public reports are correct, the interview with Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia, who Trump famously on a recorded call said, that he just needs to find 11,780 votes, just one more than necessary, in fact, to defeat Joe Biden. If he's only being brought in now, 2.5 years after the fact, that's very concerning. But I don't think we can lay that at the feet of the special counsel. I do think the Justice Department was way too slow in investigating these allegations before his appointment.